Hey guys, what's up? So I plan on doing my Voltaire Declare speech next week, but for now, actually this week technically, it's Monday, 1:30 a.m. right now. I'm not sure when I'll upload this. Either when I wake up or somehow I'll stay awake and I'll edit this. But originally this was going to be kind of a short review, but here it is. Sorry about that. But it's not going to be short. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I just watched If a Tree Falls, the story of the Earth Liberation Front. I don't know how well you can see this. It looks like it's capturing pretty well. But anyway, so I went to the Providence, Rhode Island Book Fair recently. My friend Will said, "Oh man, I watched this documentary. I loved it. I think you'd really like it too, and I'm gonna buy it." And I thought he was buying it for me, but he bought it for himself. And then he let me borrow it, and I was like, "Cool." So I watched it tonight. I didn't have much else to do, I thought first off I just want to give a really brief review. I don't really want to get into a review of it or whatever. I more want to talk about the themes it addresses because that's really what's important. It's not really trying to be like a cinematographic movie or anything like that. There's not much to review. Maybe there is, I don't know. But at least from my perspective, I more want to get into the themes it draws out. But my basic thoughts on the movie, it's really good. It's really fair. It's really balanced. Not the Fox News fair and balanced, like actually fair and balanced. Like gives both sides pretty valuable attention and like their best arguments for it on each side. Yeah, it gives more time to the Earth Liberation Front on a lot of issues, but it kind of had to do that. And anytime it does, it usually tries to give the counterpoint to it. Usually. Not all the time, but usually. And there were some good, thought-provoking oppositional sides. So I certainly enjoyed the movie. I would recommend it to anyone. You don't have to be an environmentalist to like this movie. I wouldn't consider myself an environmentalist. I mean, that's not to say I don't care about the environment. I think the environment's, wonderfully important. Wonderfully important. I don't know if that works, but I think the environment's, of course, really important. I really don't think you'll find anyone who says that they outwardly hate the environment or think it's unimportant. We all live in the environment. I don't think any one of us can really say in any amount of truth that we do hate the environment. We just want to see it all blown to smithereens. But, of course, that's not what environmentalists are objecting to. They're objecting to egregious amounts of wilderness and devastation to ecological systems and saying that this shit has already happened and we need to get active. So the Earth Liberation Front was a sort of really radical tendency that evolved from a few actions that happened in Oregon. Basically, and this is sort of a really shallow background of the ELF, but they were an organization that came out of the WTO protests. I think they came out of that. No, they didn't come out of that. They were after that. I think they had their first arson before that. But at any rate, so it came out of different movements for environmentalist justice. One that came out of a national public forest that they didn't want people to start logging in, and they set up an encampment for about a year. They basically did an Occupy sort of thing. And then the police actually came in and knocked them down. And then actually the federal government stepped in and said that the logging company couldn't do it. So that was something that's not in the film, but it does actually happen. You can catch that on the commentary if you don't want to do the research online. I didn't do the research for it. In fact, I've done very little research for almost any of these things. I just want to say what was on the top of my head. I haven't done any big research onto any of these things. So if you're like, well, Nick, how could you not notice blah, blah, blah on the internet? It's like, well, I didn't do the research on that. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to come off as highly informed or anything. I just want to say what I was thinking during the movie. And then I watched it with commentary. And I looked at all the extra stuff to get the most out of it that I could. You can't see my hands, but I just said most, like that. Like Johann Most. So it was a really good film, like I said. And the ELF basically came out of, like I'm trying to get at, a few protests that didn't really go well for peace and love, man. I'm sorry. I like to make fun of the liberals like that sometimes. No disrespect, liberals. I like some of the things you do sometimes. Anyway, it came out of a lot of the failures that happened there, and especially a burning an arson that happened at the slaughterhouse that was openly like killing lots and lots of horses and reducing their population to a big extent, I guess. And the company didn't start back up after, and actually by 2007 they closed their last place. So that was a pretty effective arson in terms of what they wanted to do. I'm not saying it was moral or whatever. So this movie brings up a lot of themes. If you want to learn more about the ELF, I'm not going to go over an overview. I'm going all over the place. You can just look them up. I'll put a link in the description for their Wikipedia, and you can go from there. So this drew out a lot of themes, and I kind of want to get into just about all of them and see, how I felt. So one thing that really stood out to me is the sort of radicalism versus reformism stuff. Whether we need radical tactics as a tactic to overthrow these sort of abuses on the environment, or just radicalism in protests and activist circles in general, really, or we need to focus more on reformism, or maybe something that really wasn't talked about, but both could be done. I'm not necessarily saying I support that, but so the radicalism was usually in the sense of basic minor monkey wrenching of tractors and stuff, minor property damage, to all the way to talks of killing, actually targeting quote-unquote captains of industry, people themselves. And then sort of lower below that was targeting the companies that they thought. And they never wanted, the ELF has never killed anyone. It's always been property damage. We'll get into that a bit. But whether or not that was good, or we should have protests and civil disobedience, but non-violent stuff, and just chants and marches, and what, but with the slaughterhouse, I mean, it was the perfect illustration of radicalism being reformism, because there had been protests for about 10 years about the slaughterhouse. It's been going on for a long time, I guess. And the ELF just set fire to the place. They couldn't recoup the costs, and they just shut down that place, didn't rebuild it, couldn't use the insurance, or didn't have it, or I don't know what. And about less than 10 years later, all of their factories shut down. I don't know if the ELF was responsible for all of their factories shutting down, but I have a feeling it definitely had some sort of impact. So for me, that's a win for radicalism. Now, of course, what radicalism is relative, of course. And this is another problem that they brought up in the movie, is that people, once you get into radicalism of any sort, and radical just means root. So once you just, I guess you're just trying to return to the root, which is funny because you're environmentalist. Haha, you're getting to the root. Once you really get to the root or the core of what you believe, and you really want to push that as hard as you can, because that's the root, that's the core thing, that's the really important thing. It's all about pushing that root, that central belief. Once you get into that, people who don't follow it as harsh as you, well, they're just not as hardcore as you. They're not radicals, and it begins to be this sort of witch hunt in activist circles that, well, you're not as radical as I am. Fuck you. I'm not gonna have you in my actions. I don't want to see you around these. I almost said around these parts. Around these parts. I don't want to see you around here. Fuck you. Get more radical and then talk to me. But I think the movie really pointed out that this leads to splintering of movements, and I think this is something that's wrong with the anarchist movement at large. Is that sometimes we're just way more concerned with weaseling out people who just aren't good enough for us, and instead we just pick all of our, and it's not like I'm a saint. I'm not saying I've never done this, or I've never not picked on somebody else. I'm not saying that. I've totally made fun of other people in anarchist circles, radical circles, whatever. So, full disclosure. But whether it's good to be that radical sometimes, because once you get to that root, anyone who's not as far down as you are, or anyone who is up at the branches, are just like enemies to you. You can't even work with them because, and this isn't the universal case, obviously. Not everybody works like this, but this is a problem that can happen in radical circles. The reformists are everyone. Everyone's a reformist. You're basically on a witch hunt, an intellectual witch hunt, where you just think everybody's a reformist, basically. So I don't know how prominent this is or how much it actually happens in radical circles. I can see it happening a lot. In the ELF, that is what eventually happened. There was talks after a few other fires of basically targeting people. and a few of the members, one of the guys who are one of the guys who is at the center of all this, Daniel McGowan, who you can see, right there. That's Daniel. I don't know how well you can see him, but that's Daniel McGowan, and he said, no, this is getting out of hand. He had been he had gotten involved in 2 different arsons, and they went terribly. They were basically the polar opposite of the slaughterhouse. One was based on faulty information, and the other one spread a little bit too far and burnt like a library and stuff like that they didn't mean to burn. So it was really a test that radicalism could do some good and it could do some bad. Reformism didn't seem to be that important, and it was like, at some points during the movie, I'm gonna try to be honest here without saying I support this shit, but I was really like, wow, the police are fucking brutalizing you guys. Burn something, do something, fucking respond in some sort of way that isn't all peace and love, man. But I want to say I don't necessarily advocate violence against the police, or I just want to say this just in case you're watching, FBI. I don't necessarily advocate violence. In fact, violence is probably one of the last things I think anarchists really should ever use, if they ever do have to. And really, it should be in self-defense if it's ever used. Now, of course, we can make arguments about systematic violence and stuff like that. And I get that argument, and I understand with it. I empathize with it. So I'm not discounting people's frustrations. I really hate, and I'm going to go on a tangent here for a second, sorry. I really hate when liberals, they discount the struggles of other people because they're like, well, you shouldn't use violence, man, because, like, they're not hurting you and they're not doing anything, and then you got to point out, like, well, see what the fuck's going on in Portland, and like and see what the black communities still have to deal with, and the Muslims have to deal with. They have to deal with all these Nazi fucks and all these skinheads, and not that all skinheads are Nazis, by the way, but they got to deal with all these racists who still fucking exist and still want to impress their values and beliefs on them. And it's fucking wrong, and we got to do something about this. That doesn't mean we need to bash every Nazi's head in, or that we should bash any of them in, but it means we should be aware that these cultural, systematic impositions on people exist, and that maybe things like the NAP aren't necessarily always the best answer. So, radicalism versus reformism is a very interesting topic. It didn't point to any one conclusion, but that was what was good about it. It got you thinking. For myself, I haven't reached a conclusion. Like I said, at one point I was all for the radicals. This was the first time I watched it without the commentary, not after I'd done it. But then I started seeing the repercussions, and then I started seeing like all of the consequences that people were and were not taking into effect, and the counter arguments. And I was like, this isn't so black and white. It's not like radicalism is always the answer and reformism is always the answer, or even that there's a mix. I mean, it's so murky. And that's not to say there are no answers and that we can't get any answers, but to say that it's more difficult than I think these groups actually thought it was. Maybe someone out there has the answer. Hey, leave a comment. Tell me the answer. There's also another comment about whether the protesters were just attention seekers. They wanted to make the police look bad. And actually, I think that there's a bad tendency within activist circles to make it look like the police are worse than they actually are. Now, this isn't to defend the police. I'm not fucking defending the police. I don't like the police. I don't think they have any legitimate claim of authority. And I totally get people who fight back against them. I'm not saying condone it. I'm just saying I understand where they're coming from, why they do what they do. I'm not about to demean their struggles. But there is a certain amount of truth to what the cop was saying about that some protesters use the police as a symbolic message of the violence inherent in the system, insert Monty Python reference here, and that the police aren't actually intending to do it, but they get pushed to it by the protesters, or something like that. Now, obviously, a part of me, and I even said this explicitly, was boo fucking who to you. Like, you guys beat the shit out of people. You think I'm going to feel bad for you? In the end, I didn't feel bad for him, but I did understand where it was coming from. And I thought, yeah, it's true to some extent that some activists do just push the police around until they snap, and then they hit them and say, oh, look, see, this is the violence inherent in the system. And, yeah, it is, but you provoked it, and you're ignoring the fact that you provoked it. So this is a problem that I see with civil disobedience in New Hampshire. I'm not going to name names or people's or organizations because that's not what this video is about. But I've seen this, or I know about it. I know it happens. So activists, get your shit together. Company policy. Not that I have my shit together. Company policies. So at one point they talked about how one of the logging companies, I guess, replants trees, and I was like, oh. Well, that makes it a lot less black and white, because I was all fucking mad at this timber company. Thought they were I didn't think they were Satan, I didn't think they were all bad people, but they were doing some fucked up shit. They were cutting down huge, swaths. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Swaths. Anyway, they were clearing huge amounts of forests and huge amounts of this and that, and I was just like, wow. I mean, you got to do something about that. Not necessarily burn them down, but do something. But then they said, well, no, for every tree that we knock down, we plant back 6. And I thought, okay, is that true? I didn't look into it. But on the commentary, the producers actually commented on it, which I was very happy about, because I was like, I knew I wasn't going to do any research. Not because I don't want to, not because I don't think it's important, but because I just wanted to talk about what my feelings were off the cuff when I watched the movie and the extra features, including the commentary. So during the commentary, the director and the editor and all of that, they were talking about this, and they were saying, well, yeah, we thought this was really interesting. We really wanted to make this a bigger aspect of the film, but we were limited by 85 minutes because it's a documentary. So we only put in a brief aside, but we thought it was really interesting point. But the ELF and people like them in similar circles, just environmentalists in general, had a response to that, and they said, well, sure, that may be true that they have a policy. He said the law is the law. You don't get away with breaking the law, which I find is laughable. But let's excuse that for a second. Let's take him at his word and say, yeah, they do replant 6. Well, there's a few concerns with that. Is that according to the environmentalists, the trees that they usually plant are the type of trees that are just kind of crop trees that they're just going to rehash anyway. The trees are all one type. They're all going to be the same age. They're not going to actually try to cause diversity in the forest, which would lead to different nutrients getting into the ground and better nature and better environment and all that. It would just be very much the same environment in all the places, make it way easier for them to cut it down in the future. And also there were cases where they would cut down these huge trees that were thousands of years old. They were huge, gigantic. There was this one tree that one of these guys talked about that was he says he reckoned was around the time that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. How are you going to replace that? Huh? Unless you give him another 500 years, totally alone, by the way, not with any interference. Maybe you get the same sort of tree. Maybe. But you're not going to do that. You're going to cut it down. And there's a sort of loss to this, And I'm not saying that the timber companies are evil, the evildoers of Satan, or that the environmentalists are misguided. It's something deeper and more conflicting than that. And I just watched the documentary. I didn't look into this and see what their actual practices are, what the environmentalists have gathered. Okay, so if anyone wants to link me or tell me how I'm dead wrong, send me a Facebook message, send me a comment. I'd love to look more into this. I don't. If the issues are even deeper. Right now, I don't have, aside from doing this video, I don't really have much invested in environmentalism right now, which again isn't to say I don't care about the environment, but it's to say I don't have much to say about this subject other than what I just witnessed and what my feelings were. If someone wants to get me re-engaged with the subject and say, hey, you said this, but I think it's actually this, or hey, you said this, maybe you'd be interested in this, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy. But for the time being, I'm going to take the company at their word and the environmentalists at their word and say that I think both have good points. I think in the end, I would say that they are doing more harm than good in terms of the timber company. This is my own personal feelings. Again, I haven't done all the research, so I could be totally off. But from what I got from the documentary and all the info that was available, I think the timber companies are doing more harm than good, especially because it seems like from the environmentalist perspective, they're not really encouraging growth. It's just a sort of sterilized corporate growth. Big surprise there, right? Sorry, that's my bias, but yeah, I just think in the end that they are doing more harm than good in terms of the timber company, and that even if they are replanting, I think that there is something good to be said about people who stand up for the trees. I'm not saying necessarily it's right, but I do think there's a bit of integrity to it that the media doesn't give credit for, and these companies sometimes don't give credit for. So we're going to move on. Ethics of radical tactics. This is going to be a big one too. It really raised whether you could use these sort of tactics and they could be ethical. There's a big problem with the media and these companies and people in general is that they don't think of people as being separate from property. At least some don't. This is a common recurrent themes within radical circles, is that, with Black Bloc and stuff like that, is that people are somehow inherently tied up to property or materials or whatever. So when you do property damage, you're doing terrorism. We'll get into the subject of terrorism later, but you're doing you're causing harm to people, but you're really not. I mean, you are in terms of money, but there's no person was ever hurt in these tactics. Which again, I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm just saying there's a distinction to be made between property and people. People are not property. Like Kevin Carson said it best, anarchism is the radical notion that other people are not your property. Maybe he didn't say it best, but I think he really epitomized the point I'm trying to get at here, is that you can't equate people with property. People aren't property. We're more than just things that can be used and disposed of. We're more than just materials. We're more than just stuff. We're thinking, living, soulful beings, which isn't to say I'm religious or anything, but I think there's much more to us than just property. So when talking about these kind of acts, about burning down hotels that we're going to expand into national forests and all this other stuff, it's like you can't just reduce the property down to human beings, because that's not reality. That's not what's going on. Anyway, the ethics of radical tactics is pretty complicated. I'm not going to exhaustively go on it, but very briefly, I think it's disputable how ethical these things are. I mean, you could definitely say that you're acting in self-defense because the environment is a part of your life, and if the environment is ruined, you could be ruined. There's really no need for me to swear there, but you could be ruined. And it's in some abstract way, I guess you could say that you're acting in self-defense. I'm not saying that's a fair or legitimate claim. I'm just saying you could make the case that because they're attacking the environment, because we depend on trees to breathe oxygen and live and have a good environment, and a good environment promotes a healthy lifestyle, and a healthy lifestyle provides for a better life and a life in general, that you're in some abstract way defending life itself. The argument is kind of shaky to me, but it makes sense, and I empathize with it. Again, I'm not going to deny people their struggles. I think that these are legitimate claims to some extent or another. I'm not fully on board with them per se, but I do think they have a lot more credence to them than some people give them, like the media and a lot of other people who just don't really know a lot about these things or aren't involved in these circles. So the radical tactics that they use, like burning buildings and stuff like that, I mean, with the horse slaughter, that was their best case model. I mean, was that moral? Well, it's like burning a building. Are you doing something immoral by burning a building in which harmful things are happening? Not necessarily against you, but things you really care about, like the environment, or like horses, or like wildlife, or whatever. Is it ethical to sort of come back against that and say, no, you can't fucking do that, and try protests, and try doing your grievances to the local town meetings, and try to picket outside, and try to boycott them, and then all that doesn't work, and you try this for years and years. Eventually, what are you going to do? These guys decided to burn down a place that was killing horses openly. There was an article about the Associated Press, the ELF, the ELF? Yeah, Earth Liberation Front, sorry. The ELF learned about it, and they burned the fucker down, and they didn't recoup the costs. The horses stopped being slaughtered. They didn't open back up. Nobody was killed. Nobody was harmed. Thousands and billions of property damage, but nobody was hurt. And the horses were stopped. Again, I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying there's an argument to be made that this stuff is not as black and white as the media wants to portray it. So in none of these arguments I'm saying that they're necessarily right, and they may not even have a place among tactics, and we'll get into that later. But I want to drop the subject because I'm really conflicted on this. So some of the members, once they were caught for burning these buildings, were basically cooperating with the government. And at first I was really pissed off because that's where David, excuse me, not David. Why can't I remember his name? Daniel McGowan. Daniel McGowan, he was really frustrated. He was like, they did what? They cooperated? We had a blood oath. Not literally a blood oath, figuratively speaking, folks. That we wouldn't tell on each other, and we wouldn't cooperate with the feds, and we wouldn't do this. But, spoiler alert, so if you haven't seen the film, maybe skip for a few seconds. But Daniel eventually takes the plea agreement himself, but he does it on the condition that he's not going to rat on the other folks that did it, who got involved in the arsons and fires. And he's still serving time. I'll get more into him later, but yeah, so I don't know. I mean, at first I was like, yeah, they're fucking sellouts. They're cooperating with the feds. How could they do this? But when you looked at them, and like this one woman named Suzanne who said that she cooperated. She didn't look happy about it. This other guy, I forget his name, but he cooperated, and he was actually the one who opened the case wide open. He opened it up, and if it hadn't been for him, they might never have been caught. And it was all because the feds, they bluffed. They said that they had way more evidence than they did, or they didn't lie. They led him to believe that they may or may not have evidence against him. So in 2 hours after they told him that, where he said he would actually take a day or two, in 2 hours he said that, yeah, I'm going to cooperate as much as I can. And at first I was outraged. I'm like, how can you do this to people that really trusted you with their lives and you cared about? And one thing to know about that, though, is that a lot of these people had code names, so they didn't know each other personally. So it's like, even though they had maybe a figurative blood oath, they didn't know each other very well, so it didn't make for a good community. And maybe if they hadn't used the code names or done some other system, or used the code names and done something more, maybe that wouldn't have happened. I don't know. Maybe it would have happened earlier. Who can say? But it definitely put a new light on me for whether cooperating is actually selling out. Because a lot of these people just weren't ready to deal with. They were facing, and I haven't made this clear, they were facing life sentences for what they've done. And some people just couldn't face that. One guy actually killed himself before he even got to the sentencing. Like, he got thrown in jail and he just killed himself there. He wasn't ready for it. And 6 of the people out of the remaining 13, there were 14 people. It was all during a sort of mass arrest at one point of ELF members who had taken part in different fires across the country. And one guy killed himself, and 6 out of the remaining 13 made plea agreements that involved discussing the events and talking about it and saying how the others were involved. 4 of them decided for alternative agreements, so they didn't quote unquote sell out. But it's a lot harder than that to really say that they sold out. And I know this is a common theme. It's a common theme within the movie. It's going to be a common theme here. That things are not so black and white. Things are a lot more complicated. That is a theme that this movie really drives at. I think it does it really well. And I don't know whether, to an extent, yeah, you're selling out your principles, but it's like when you're come down to it, one of the women says, well, until you've been in my position, I don't think you can know for sure whether you live by your principles. And there was an earlier libertarian scandal a few months ago about this, and I was in shock about it. And this brings me back to that, and whether the person involved in that was really justified or not. And I don't know. if I was faced with this, if I was either faced with cooperating and getting like under 10 years, or not cooperating and getting life. I mean, I couldn't imagine putting my family under that sort of stress, and my friends and people who I love, my girlfriend. I think that I don't know whether I'd cooperate or not. I definitely can't say for sure that I wouldn't. So, I mean, so if that makes me, not radical enough for you and a heretic and somebody you don't want to hang out with, cool, don't do it. Because I'm a loose cannon. I'm a principled person, but when you're faced with shit like this, sometimes it's not always good to go down in a blaze of glory, and sometimes you just have to recognize what reality is. And reality is we live in a police state, and they have the power, and we don't. And taking a life sentence, maybe it'll get you a few sentences, not supposed to be a pun, in the newspaper, and you'll be remembered for the rest of your life as some brave soul. But what is it really going to do? I mean, Gandhi's remembered as a brave soul who did all that starvation and prison tactics, and so is MLK and all these other people, and that hasn't led to the overthrow of the government or anything like that. You got to think about what the impact is, and that leads me to my next thing. The impact of these things, these arsons, were mixed. So, for example, the slaughterhouse was probably their best example. Not only did no one get hurt, but the corporations took a hit to the pocket they couldn't recover from. They shut down, and they didn't open back up, and horses stopped being slaughtered. I mean, that's best case scenario for that sort of tactic where you already think that property damage is fine. So within that context or framework, yeah, this was perfect, pretty much. It's like a case model, I guess. But the impact was mixed. I mean, two simultaneous arsons that they did shortly before the ELF broke up, Earth Liberation Front, just in case you guys forgot or something, I don't know, was on this guy who was supposedly experimenting with trees and putting all these growth hormones in it that were artificial, and then somebody else who was like studying trees or doing something bad to the environment. I know, something bad to the environment, duh. I don't remember. But either way, like I said before, one of the cases was based on faulty information, and the other one linked, or didn't link, the fire spread to a nearby library, which they didn't mean to happen. And a lot of information on environmental stuff was lost in the process, ironically. So that's when Daniel McGowan just said, no, that's enough. That's enough. I got his name right. And other people felt, no, we should go further. This hasn't gone far enough. We got to attack people themselves, and that's what led to the split in the ELF. So mistakes and consequences. It certainly seemed from the movie that not everyone fully thought out what they were actually doing, and Daniel made this pretty explicit that he wasn't thinking at the time all the implications or what was going on. He just thought, man, this shit's fucked up. I got to do something. And these protests just aren't working. These monkey wrenches aren't working. I got to do something more radical. And I guess this goes along with the impact thing in a sort of way, but the consequences of them doing this, I mean, it was a big risk versus a huge risk, really, versus an uncertain goal. And whenever you have a case like that, you have to be really careful about what you do and why you do it. So to kind of, I'm not sure if this will wrap up tactics. We might talk more about tactics later, but to have a sort of, if we don't, this will be sort of my last word on it, but we might. I didn't systematically write down my notes. I just kind of wrote them down as I saw them. Is there a better way? I mean, at least here, the city, at least not here, there's the place in Eugene, Oregon, where a lot of this shit happened. And it's like that National Forest police that came in and knocked down the encampment, and then protests that happened afterwards, 1 or 2 protests every week, and the police started getting more enamored with the protesters. Not really. Started beating the shit out of them and pepper spraying them and whatever. I mean, that didn't seem to be working. Building up the activist community didn't seem to be working because the police just started building up. Getting more radical didn't seem to be working because the police would just outnumber them, beat them, and then pepper spray them and stuff like that. Monkey wrenching didn't seem to be working. They just eventually get people out of the trees. it was just like, what else could we do but then burn the fucker down? And at one point, it was like, why didn't they just target the police station? You know, that was something that I think I either said or thought, and I don't condone that. I'm not saying that's right, but it was a question that I had. Why didn't they do it? If the police were this bad, but the answer is obvious. The consequence of that would be enormous. Anyone who is even remotely implicated in such a thing, and of course, people are always in the police office, so there would be no way to avoid personal harm unless everybody got out somehow, and then it'd have to be even more pre-planned and staged, and so on and so forth. So it just seems way overly complicated and stuff like that. But at any rate, it's like the police had to be dealt with somehow, and the activist community just wasn't able to deal with them, I guess. There's this book called Our Enemies in Blue, and it's recently been put on PDF. I want to read it at some point, but I'm not sure what the better way is. I mean, I'm not going to come at this video swinging with a lot of answers, just raising a lot of the questions that they did and giving my own take on it and my interpretations. And I'll have answers every now and then, but I mean, I'm really still coming out of this movie thinking, wow, this is a deep issue that has a lot of problems, and there's no clear-cut answer, for me at least. For me. You might come out of this and say, wow, the environmentalists are a bunch of idiots and they deserve to be discredited. Or you might come to the opposite conclusion, wow, government's a bunch of assholes and they deserve to be mocked and whatever else. I don't know. But if there's a better way, I want to hear it. I mean, I think that dual power and direct action and civil disobedience and education are really important. And counter-economics too, along the lines of agorism and Samuel Edward Conklin III and stuff like that. You can look that up. Yeah, I think there are better ways, but in this particular case, I don't know what they could have done. So, move on from that. So, radicalism, as I already kind of talked about, so I'll go briefly over this, is that it's kind of a self-imposed narrowing, and I talked about this on the mutualism discussion page. I don't think many people watching this will know this, but I said that even just applying yourself to one specific school of thought is inherently a boxing in of your own mind. It's an imprisoning of your values, and it just boxes you in. And I just really think it makes it so it's really hard to come out with more varied or pluralistic approaches or more wide approaches, and that I don't think blind pluralism is good. So I'm not saying we should align ourselves with white nationalists or radical right wing. Wow, that was a Freudian slip. Right wing people who oppose the state but just want to reimpose it with a sort of cultural authoritarianism, based on race realism and all that stuff. Oh shit, I shouldn't have mentioned that. I'll leave that in, but I shouldn't have mentioned that. I'm going to get disliked up the ass now. Yeah, and it leads to imploding communities, and that's another thing, is that this radicalism can become really destructive sometimes, and it just leads to... I have a little bit of water there. And it leads to basically imploding activist communities. And at that point, you've got to ask yourself, are you feeling lucky? Well, are you? No, I'm just kidding. That's not really what you should ask yourself. What you should ask yourself is if this radicalism is really worth it, if that's what it leads to. The ethics of being an informant, I kind of already touched on this. It's basically cooperating. It's that whole shindig. So, this is a big discussion. Terrorism. What is terrorism? So, terrorism to me is a general act of political repression or oppression that happens when a group decides upon themselves to use some sort of tactic of fear-inducing, some tactic that induces fear into the general populace in order to gain political power. I think that's basically what terrorism is, or maybe not in political power, but a political act of violence done to induce fear, which is why it's called terrorism. Which I actually hadn't thought of until just now. So, shock to me too, guys. It's it's a very broadly defined term, and they even talk about this in the commentary. It's like none of the agencies, even in the government and in the UN, there are different ways to describe terrorism, and they've just not come to one solid conclusion about what it means. And the reason I bring this up, of course, is that they were called terrorists, but a lot of the people objected to that. And one of the guys really high up in the government said, "Look, you don't have to be a bank robber. You don't have to be Bonnie and Clyde to be a bank robber, and you don't have to be such and such to be." I mean, basically, he was saying you don't have to be hurting people to be a terrorist. It's just an intended act of violence to incite fear. And I think that's too broad. I think that a lot of governmental acts would fall under this. I actually think government in general would pretty much be a de facto terrorist organization. They induce fear into the populace via violence of prisons and the police and the DEA and the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, I forget what they're called, that do the break-ins to the marijuana, the people who grow that stuff, and, or is it the DTA? Maybe it's the DTA. And, they have the DCF or DSS for families, and, I mean, they got their own terrorism. So it's like, who the fuck are they to really call other people terrorists? I want to give I really want to start giving solid answers on these questions, but I know that I really can't. I'll try, but only in terms of how I genuinely feel, not just so I can give an answer. Because you shouldn't give an answer just because you want to give an answer. You should give an answer because that's really how you feel. And really how I feel about this is that they don't meet the definition of terrorism. I feel like the government was using that as, ironically, a way to induce fear into the public. It's not really ironic for government, but it's ironic because they're calling other people terrorists. They're using terrorist-type tactics to call other people terrorists. And they have these cells that they basically treat people like non-humans, like you're not anything. They're called like CMUs or something. I'll get more into that later. But I don't think they met the standards of being a terrorist. I don't think that they did it with the intent to either gain political power or to necessarily induce fear into the general populace. It was to raise general awareness in the populace and maybe a bit of fear in the corporations that are doing the harm. But it's not to gain political power, and it's not to gain control or power in society, at least not in terms of political offices, not that I'm aware of anyway. And I mean, certainly the people who did 9/11 weren't trying to do that either, right? I mean, they weren't trying to get political office or gain or political power, at least not in the official, get up in the U.S. Government's way. But they certainly were trying to induce fear and gain power over the populace in terms of perception and trying to make it seem like the empire wasn't so as indestructible as it thought it was. So I don't think they fall under the terrorism thing. I think there are some good counter arguments to be made. I'd love to hear them. So if you have them, please give them to me. But at the moment, I'm not convinced. So there were, like I said before, there were anonymous names in the community, and I'm unsure whether that was really the best way. They were all named after forest things of a foresty nature. And I don't know if that was the best way to go about it, but that's what they did. They had code names, and it was a double-edged sword because nobody knew who anybody was, so the spokesman couldn't, the ELF had a spokesman for the few years it was active, and it really was only a few years here and there, but that was important few years for sure, but I'm just saying, really, it was a short amount of time when you think about it, at least maybe compared to other organizations, but anyway. The ELF spokesman didn't know any of the people in there, and when he saw who they were, he was shocked. He didn't know any of these people. He didn't think that any of them was it. He actually says there's an extra feature, and it's an extended interview with him. And he's talking about how he thought it was a bunch of old men who didn't necessarily have any big ties to the environmentalist movement, but were just tired of this shit and wanted to do something radical about it, and that's how they knew all these tricks and about how not to get caught, because they were old pros and veterans, when in reality it was a bunch of kids. It was a bunch of 20-year-old adults, young adults, that were, I mean, pretty new to radicalism, but they knew their shit and they were serious about it. And that's one thing I really respect about the ELF. Whether you agree with their tactics or not, you gotta. I think you have to respect their commitment and their seriousness about their activism. They took that shit seriously, and they went all the way. Which brings me next topic. I'm not sure. In conclusion about the anonymous names versus real names, I'm not sure what they should have done. Again, it's debatable whether that would have made anything better. But on the topic of going all the way, I'm not going to talk about sex. Instead, are extremes necessary? And I think they are. And I'm just going to say this on the basic concept of yin and yang, which I was reminded about today by, oddly enough, a Chugga Conroy video. He makes LPs, which are Let's Plays, and weird to be talking about him in a video about this. But anyway, he was talking about, the yin and yang, and the basic concept, of course, is that you can't have good without evil. You can't have too much of one without things being out of balance, and that's why evil always comes back, and that's why good always comes back, and they're always in an interlocking struggle. I'm not sure if that's dialectics or something, but at any rate, I think extremes are necessary. I think they're always going to exist, even if they're not necessary. So I think it's a pretty. I think actually this is one of the simplest questions, oddly enough, even though it's such a big overlapping or huge question. I think it's pretty easy to answer that yes, extremes are necessary, and if they're not necessary, they're going to exist anyway, so what does it matter? I just always think you're going to have fringe movements and fringe movements and fringe movements that are just going to go so wacky that everyone else is going to look at themselves and go wow, we should readjust where we are, or we should not let these assholes over here ruin our movement. And that was basically the environmentalist sort of response to the ELF. A lot of people, even the Earth First journal, which advocated lower forms of monkey wrenching and stuff like that, they weren't completely on board, and a lot of people weren't on board with the ELF. And I mean, it was very much a small knit people, a small group of people who didn't really even know each other, honestly. So complex or simple, this stuff is complex, and I think a much deeper research and analysis would be warranted on my part, and anyone's part, really, who wanted to get more answers. Because this isn't about getting answers, it's about raising questions. And I think the best sorts of documentaries are the ones that do that. Not Michael Moore's trashy documentary films where all he does is point blame, and I don't think he ever comes up with satisfying answers. I haven't watched all of his things, but I've watched Bowling for Columbine. I've watched... what was the other one? I watched his the capitalism one. That was an old review. That was one of the first videos I ever made, and I thought both were pretty shitty. When I'm looking back at them now, I think they're both pretty shitty in terms of journalism. I think this is way superior. I think the journalist even did a post screening interview at some place. I forget what it is. Sorry. So it was in Ashland, Oregon, with Marshall Curry and Sam Coleman, the director and screenwriter or something. I forget. I'm sorry. I don't know who I'm apologizing to. But it is complex, and yeah, I think that what was I saying? That the sort of stuff Michael Moore made, I just don't really have any respect for it because it's so totally biased. I don't really want to watch Sicko. I don't really want to watch any of his other documentaries. They're just political stints that he uses to go against and advocate for social democratic reform. So I don't really find him impressive, and quite honestly, I don't really like a lot of what he says anyway. I once, and this is a tangent, sorry, going on a Michael Moore tangent. Well, it's documentaries, and we're talking about liberals, and so I guess it was inevitable, right? So there was this one article I wrote that it was in defense of the Occupy movement that I thought was kind of cool, but I mean, after that, it was like, what the fuck have you done? I don't think you've done much. So there is a bit of reformism that actually is successful. So in the pepper spray, some people in there are blatantly pepper sprayed on the eyes, and like for resisting. They were being peaceful and civil disobedience. They were holding on to something. I couldn't quite make out what. But they were pepper sprayed in the eyes, and they said, you know, you can't do this. We're being peaceful. Of course they can't. It's a police state. Your rights don't matter. Duh. But at any rate, they did sue, and they did win, but it was just for $1, I guess. The comment. At first, at the first time I heard that they won was in the post-screening Q&A in Ashland, Oregon. They said they had won some sort of financial suit. They said it wasn't a big financial suit, but they said it was more about the symbolism. I didn't know how small it was. I figured it must have been something, though. In the actual audio commentary on the film, on the full feature-length audio commentary on the film, they say it was only for $1, but it was more about the symbolism that they could actually win in the courtroom. But, I mean, that's a lot of energy and a lot of stuff to put in just for $1 and just for symbolic victory. So I don't really think that'd be worthwhile to me. The other one was that at the fort that they stuck out for a year, eventually the federal government actually stepped in, amazingly, and said that no, you can't do this. These are national forests, and they should be protected. Blah blah blah. So that is somewhat of a significant victory. I mean, at least for the group, if nothing else, they did accomplish what they wanted to. It's weird that it might look weird, like they're making some sort of argument in favor of radicalism, that they didn't actually post that these two reformist type actions did actually achieve something. But you got to remember a few things. First, this is focused on ELF, so this is inherently going to be more leaning towards focusing on radical tactics. But the other thing is that they just didn't have the time. Again, it's an 85-minute thing, and they do go over some of the things that they missed in the commentary. There are also a few deleted scenes, and there are also a few extended interviews. So that's all good stuff to check out. One last thing I want to talk about. I know this has been long, but I'm glad I got to do it because I like making long videos for you guys. I've been on a roll with that recently, and I'm going to be happy to do my Volt 3 Declare. I'm not sure whether I should do it me just talking, or should I do it as a slideshow, or I'm not sure. If you guys have any thoughts on that, let me know. I'm kind of conflicted on it because I feel like both could work. But I don't want to have you guys look at me and like for 2 hours straight look at my ugly mug, right? Who wants to do that? Oh wait, shit, I already did that, didn't I? The left libertarianism thing. I'm just kidding. I knew I did that. I was just setting myself up for desecration. I don't know. Anyway, making fun of myself. So this is my last point, especially as an anarchist without adjectives. I kind of agreed with this point about radical spaces doing this. Converts versus heretics. What are you more important? What do you think is more important? Getting the purest and cleanest and shiniest activist group, or are you about getting a core group of people and then getting, as good as people as you can get, but, they don't necessarily have to be fully hardcore or perfect. I'm for getting a cadre of people who are really committed, really serious, really good-hearted, all-around decent people. They don't have to be perfect, but decent people who I can rely on and trust, and to lead a sort of revolution, social, cultural, whatever. Not necessarily through violence, of course. But outside of that, I'm fine with a broad-based populist movement with a really strong libertarian bent. Like Occupy, except I think way better, like a left libertarian, broad-based ALL thing. And I'd be cool with that. Because not everyone is going to be on our side, and we can't just kill everybody. I'm sorry, but like ANCAPs are going to exist in the anarchist society. That doesn't mean I think they are anarchists. It doesn't mean I don't think they aren't. Or that doesn't mean that I think they aren't. It just means that they are going to be there, and the primitivists are going to be there. And there's going to be a lot of different people in an anarchist society, and we can't just fucking kill them all. And I'm not saying that's not our only thing. I hate getting into these discussions because they're really speculative and they're really open-ended questions that could go a lot of ways, and they inherently lead to splintering based on things that we don't even fucking know if they're going to happen, yet we're splintering each other off, and it really fucking pisses me off, and I'm sorry, but I want to rant about that for a second because it just annoys me so much. You're just so interested in whether the movement is going to be squeaky clean, or if we're just going to have any fucking person at all. And it just boils down to fringe movements within fringe movements within fringe movements. And even the left libertarian ALL circle is a little bit guilty of doing that. And I speak as an enthusiast of ALL, that we do that. That even ourselves, we're splintering off ANCAPs, we're splintering off certain people, objectivists, whatever. And I do, and let me be clear here, I do think sectarianism is only bad because it is dividing lines too sharply and unnecessarily. Lines aren't bad inherently. Lines are bad inherently. It's when you make unnecessary, sharp, crude lines for no good reason that I have problems with, and that's what I think sectarianism is. I think just denying that a certain sect of people who call themselves anarchists are default, not anarchists, is problematic. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying that the claim that ANCAPs aren't anarchists is wrong. I have my problem with ANCAPs. I have my problems with every school of thought. That's why I'm an anarchist without adjectives. I just can't, right now at least, I can't settle down. I just can't settle down, yeah. I have problems with marriage too, so I guess it makes sense that I can't settle down. I'm just too unruly. I don't want to limit myself to one school of thought. Fuck that. And it just seems like radical spaces sometimes are just more about getting a nice squeaky clean movement than getting anything done. And I'm just really sick and tired of it. And it seems weird because I've only been, I've only been an anarchist for like 2 years, and I've only been a libertarian for like 3 or something. And I'm already jaded with a lot of this because a lot of this shit just repeats. It's like clockwork. It just keeps on fucking coming back. And until we learn to treat people with respect, even if we have different opinions, there's not going to be any dialogue. There's not going to be a community. There's not going to be this. When I went to Providence, the one thing that really impressed me was that there was community. There was a lot of community. There was Fab Labs. There was arts. There was singers and musicians and painters and sculptors, and there was bars, and there was co-ops, and there was an anarchist space, Libertalia, and there was all of this wonderful, rich culture and arts, and it just seems so wonderful and vibrant. And I'm in Nashua, and it's like, where the fuck is that? Nowhere. I don't see that shit anywhere. I don't see an AS220 anywhere. Where is it? That's why I want to start my own radical info shop, bookstore, cafe called Declares in Nashua, or at least in New Hampshire somewhere, where anarchists of all stripes and radicals of all stripes are welcome, and people in general are welcome. Although, let's try to keep out the cops if we can, because I just don't like cops. Sorry. When you beat the shit out of people pretty repeatedly and do all this terrible shit year after year after year, I kind of lose respect for you as an organization. Sorry. It's like, yeah, I want radical spaces to exist for people, and I want them to be open, and I want people to come into them with mutual respect and leave with mutual respect and work towards broad-based alliances. That doesn't mean we need to all hug and be kumbaya and sing by the fireside and peace and love and all that bullshit. It just means we got to look at what each other are saying and say, I'm not totally down with what you're saying, but I respect what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Good luck with what you're doing. I'm going to do my own thing, but maybe if you work on a future project, let me know about it. Maybe I'd help you out. Even that, I'd be happy if anarchists would fucking do that. But all anarchists seem to want to do sometimes is just pick out the weakest link and just pick on everybody who doesn't fit their, own little ideological things. And someone's going to say, well, no, it's not that. It's just you're not an anarchist. And it's like, that's what I mean. It's like, who the fuck cares? Sometimes I'm just like, who the fuck cares if he's not an anarchist? Just, get over it. We're 99.99999% of the population are not anarchists. What the fuck are you going to do? Keep nitpicking until you get, 2 people who perfectly agree with you? Then what? You're going to start a revolution based on 2 people? Get the fuck out. So, anyway, I am sorry about that, but that is something that I really wanted to get off my chest. As you can see, there was a lot of hot air, and I'm sure I said some things I didn't mean, or I'm sure I said some things that just really been building up for me these past few days. I've just been in a lot of discussions on the mutualism discussion page, and they've just disturbed me in some ways. Anyway, we're getting off the topic. I really apologize for doing this. I'll keep that in, though, because it is tangentially relevant to one of the themes I brought up. So I would like to thank you all for watching. One second, I will show you guys something. No, it's not that, you sexual perverts. I got this in the library recently. So this is what I'm going to be reviewing on my blog very soon. Oh wow, it's already 2:30 a.m. Holy shit, did I start at 1:30? Wow, it's been an hour. That's crazy. So I'm gonna start. I don't know how well you can hear me, so give me a second. So I'm gonna start doing chapter by chapter reviews after I read every chapter, and I'm gonna do a section overview after I finish the section, and then I'll do a book review. Or an overall feelings on the book. Right now I'm working on the first draft of my book review of Carl Hess's Community Technology, and I also have other projects that are in the work. I'm working on the Food Not Bombs New Hampshire. If you want to learn more about that, just talk to me. I'm working on the Voltairine Declared YouTube. I want to upload my introduction to left libertarianism that I did at Porkfest 2012 on the LLYTC Left Libertarian YouTube channel. Excuse me, YouTube collective, but I guess channel works too, huh? Anyway, those are some of my projects. I've got actually a few other projects I'm working on. I think that's it. Thanks a lot again for watching. And again, If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front, written by the Academy Award-nominated filmmaker Marshall Curry. Great director. Seemed like really cool guys on the commentary. I really recommend picking this up. You don't have to be an environmentalist or an anarchist or a radical or whatever to appreciate this. I think just about anybody would appreciate this. The New York Times actually gave a pretty fair and balanced, and again, not Fox News, fair and balanced, review of it. So again, Will, thank you for letting me know that this was such a good documentary. Actually, funny story before I sign off here. It was actually playing at the Boston Anarchist Book Fair last year, and I didn't go see it because I thought it was just some general thing about how people were destroying the environment or something like that. It just didn't sound interesting to me. And I'm not saying that the topic of environmental destruction isn't interesting itself, but at the time I just wasn't grabbed by it. And I also had tabling duties as All One, the Alliance Libertarian Left of New England, and I just didn't think much of it. But I'm so glad that I watched it. I'm so glad Will recommended it. It's a great documentary. Again, you don't have to be an environmentalist to appreciate this film, or an anarchist or a radical. Just go see this film. We'll buy it. I mean, oh, and one last thing. The guy in this movie, Daniel McGowan. I'm so sorry, I keep forgetting his name, and I have to look at this. But again, Daniel McGowan, right here. I'm thinking of actually sending him a letter to him in prison, because I'm pretty sure he's in prison, and they said on the post-screening Q&A in Ashland, Oregon, that he definitely can receive mail, and that there's a website. I'm going to put that in the description, supportdaniel.com.org or something like that. I'll put it in the description. I am thinking, heavily considering sending him a letter of support. This will be the first ever prisoner support outreach I've ever done, and I'll probably make note of that in the letter, and I'll probably make a copy of it, and if I do read it, I'll probably read it on my channel too. But I really feel like this guy needs our support, and I know it seems unfair that I'm going to send it to him and nobody else, but honestly, he was the guy who this film really focused on, and thus I feel the most for, and I don't think, even if I did more research on everybody else, that I would send them as heartfelt a message that I want to send to Daniel. So I'm thinking about it. I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but I want to, I think. So I'll keep you updated on that. If I do it, I'll read it, and you'll know. So again, thanks for watching. If you made it through this hour of hell, I'm sure you had to look at this for an hour. So congratulations if you got this far. And this, you had to listen to this. So I really feel bad for you there. But thank you, and I'll talk to you guys soon, I'm sure. Bye.